Welcome to School of Rock Bottom with Oliver Mason. I'm an actor, a voiceover artist, and a mental health coach. And I know firsthand that rock bottom can be the greatest teacher and the springboard for a beautiful life. And as you know, I invite fellow creatives and inspiring people that have hit rock bottom, survived, and thrived. And I'm really excited today because I have got the marvelous Maddie Kitchen in the studio. How are you, Maddie?
I'm good. I'm a little bit cold, but yeah, I'm good. Thank you.
You're right. It's a bit chilly in the studio today, and there's also a bit of a party going on, so we might have a little jig throughout. We'll see how that goes. It's so nice to see you. Thank you so much for coming down. We're going to be going on an incredible journey now of recovery from alcoholism and depression and so many different things. So I really hope you stick around. For those that don't know Maddie, I'm just going to give you a quick bio, if that's all right. So Maddie Kitchen, here we go. Maddie Kitchen is a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts in recognition of her work using film to support and advocate for inclusive and diverse mental health and addiction recovery, and is a social filmmaker and runs the non-profit Camden-based social enterprise Sobriety Films UK. She set it up in 2019 as a lived experience female-led organisation that uses film to promote and support people in recovery from addiction, mental ill health and trauma. SFUK believes in the healing power of creativity to overcome adversity. I love that. They have worked with Rethink Mental Illness, NHS England, the Alcohol Health Alliance, and many more. And it's also a member of the National Suicide Prevention Alliance, again, amongst many more. I really encourage you to go straight to the show notes where, the full details are all there. Maddie, thanks so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it. We're going to start, as I always do, with maybe the hardest question, or maybe not. I know you've had some rock bottoms in your life. We're going to start there and then take the listeners and viewers on a journey from that point. So what would you say was your rock bottom?
Wow, Ollie, thank you for having me, first of all. Okay, I have had a few rock bottoms, so it was kind of difficult for me to choose one, but I think the one that I want to tell you about today is probably the most important one that's happened in my life. That was the 1st of August, 2006. So my history, I've been in recovery for 17 years from alcoholism, and I'm also someone that suffers from mental health. So I've had depression since I was 19, and the rock bottom was basically that the 2nd of August 2006 was the day that I started my recovery journey. So the day before had been the end of an extremely painful 4-day binge. And I had ended up in A&E. And I thought that I'd basically sort of drunk myself into a nervous breakdown. I was completely shattered and shaking, and I just saw this amazing psychiatric nurse, and I said to him, "What, have I had a breakdown?" And he's like, "No." He said, "Hold out your hand." And so I held out my hand, and it was like really wobbly. And he said, "You have alcohol withdrawal." He said, "You're an alcoholic, I think, and you need to go to a 12-step meeting." And I don't know, that was when I surrendered. That was when it was like, as we say, the gift of desperation was handed to me. That experience, the rock bottom, it was just so exquisitely painful. And I think the point I want to make is that these flashpoints in my life can be extremely painful, but they are also turning points where your life starts to change, and growth is painful. So the next day I went to the GP and I said, "I think I have a problem with alcohol," which I'd never been able to admit before. and where do I go? And they referred me to the local alcohol services. I spent the next 3 days at my parents' home, and I detoxed, and it wasn't a medical detox actually, which is dangerous. So those 3 days were pretty difficult as well. And I started to attend the local alcohol services, and also 12-step meetings. And out of that horrendous rock bottom came the beginning of my new life. Wow.
I think you were diagnosed with like a clinical depression, is that right? So were you using alcohol sort of during that time as a way to essentially cope with feeling depressed, or is that too simplistic?
No, 100%. Right. That's how it started.
Okay.
So yeah, this dual diagnosis thing. So a lot of people fall through the net with dual diagnosis. If they go to addiction services, they say, you've got mental health, you need to treat the mental health, or, vice versa. So I had my first episode of clinical depression when I was 19 years old. And recovering from that, I actually, for the next 2 years, I didn't drink anything. I didn't smoke. I was kind of shattered. And then gradually, as I started to get better, I turned to alcohol to self-medicate the paralyzing anxiety. And then it became, that I was dependent on it to function.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it made the anxiety spike.
Is the worst thing. The worst thing. I mean, the best thing I did for my mental health was coming into recovery. Now, I've had depression in recovery as well, and anxiety, and I've coped with it without turning to alcohol. So when I used to drink, I was a binge drinker. So it was probably sort of towards the end, definitely every other day. The next morning, I would just be, I would feel suicidal. And just overwhelmed with anxiety and depression, and just it was but I still wanted to use that window of time that alcohol gave me to feel good. Yeah. And certainly towards the end, I wasn't even feeling good.
I mean, dual diagnosis, for those that listening to this and don't understand the term, it's when you've got addiction and a mental health condition as well. And I know a lot of people in recovery, particularly, when I'm working in the rehabs and stuff, it's really hard for people to unpick, what's addiction and what's mental health, and has one caused the other. And people go on some journeys and they put down drugs and alcohol, and they quite quickly find out actually their anxiety goes away, their depression goes away. And some people even feel like they've got bipolar disorder in early recovery because they're so up and down. But some people also have a legitimate dual diagnosis, which obviously, I don't know the stat, but it makes you a lot more likely to get an addiction, if there's already depression, already anxiety. At 19, I sort of look back to when I was 19, I had some severe mental health stuff come much later. At 19, I was at drama school, sort of having the time of my life, really, in a way, without a care in the world. That must have been really hard at that sort of really formative age of 19.
Yeah. It was. And I mean, I have to say, I was also depressed, I reckon, since the age of 13, right. But it wasn't clinical. And it was, I didn't realize what had happened to me, actually. When it started with this huge panic attack. And I was basically, I'd left A-levels, and I was a model. I just started modeling for Models 1. And I was on the tube platform, going to see this famous photographer, and he was going to take my photo. And I just suddenly, this tsunami of panic, I suppose, came over me, and it was oh my God, what's happening? And I looked around at the other people on the platform because I thought they must be feeling it too. I didn't realize it was inside me, in my head. And I looked at them and they were all like normal. And I just thought, oh my God, what's happening?
Yeah.
And that was the beginning. I didn't realize that it was, it's called unipolar affective disorder or major depressive disorder. And part of that is also severe anxiety.
Right.
I describe it as a breakdown because it was like, and I have to say that from the ages of 13 up until that point, I was dealing with active trauma, something that was happening to me, which I won't go into today.
Sure.
So I understood on one level why it had happened, because I was living, it was like an iceberg. I was showing like this much of myself, and there was all this stuff underneath when I was trying to cope with the trauma that I was living through. And I just think the way my brain was forming, and, I was still a teenager, was so affected by that. And so I wasn't really surprised when it kind of all went.
Yeah. Well, like you say, you had trauma that you were dealing with, anxiety and depression as well. I mean, often even when people talk about major depression or clinical depression, I've had guests on before around depression, and I've said, what was your anxiety levels like? And sometimes people say, actually, I didn't have a lot of anxiety, but it seems like you were getting it at all angles.
I think I should probably talk about my family situation here, because my dad was an active alcoholic. Right. And high functioning. I don't really like that word because I don't think there's such thing as high functioning alcoholic. But he managed to hold down a job. So it was very much a behavior that was modeled to me. And so I actually think, I remember him giving me this glass of baby sham when I was probably about 14. Right. And it was like sparkling. It was in this champagne glass. And I was like, oh my God, this is so glamorous. So I did actually love alcohol before then. And certainly to get rid of the feelings of shyness, and I used it then, but not in a dependent way. Got it. Yeah.
Well, it just shows how progressive it is, because it sounds like you were sort of using it like most people do, just to kind of calm your nerves, a bit of Dutch courage. I think a lot of people do that, don't they? Just to, the social lubricant, and then obviously it sort of took over. I just want to press you a little bit more about the panic attack, because it's something that we've not spoken about at all actually on this podcast yet. A lot of people don't understand panic attacks. They think it's having a bit of a wobble, feeling sort of extremely anxious, and that's it. Panic attacks, and I know firsthand this, I was actually diagnosed at one point with panic disorder, which means I was having so many panic attacks, it was a disorder. I mean, I've not had one in over a decade, but you feel like you're going to die. You literally feel like you're either going to go mad or die. Was that what yours was like?
100%. I felt like it was more about, I'm going to go mad.
Right.
And I just remember someone saying to me, if you think you're going to go mad, you're not going mad, because if you're psychotic, you don't know. So that was kind of a bit comforting. Yeah, absolutely. It for me, very physical as well, but more the feeling of, I'm going to go. Yeah, it's the panic attacks are horrendous. I had, social anxiety disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, agoraphobia. I've had it all. Right. And it's a miracle that I am actually sitting here today, I have to say. And I'm well. And I never thought that I would get well.
Well, I'm so glad you did, because you've gone on to do some incredible things, and you still are, and you're a very, very busy bee, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very lucky to have grabbed you today. Yeah, I think with my own panic attacks, part of the healing for me actually was getting a lot of education around them. There's an amazing book called No Panic, I think by Christine Ingram. I'll put a little thing in the show notes. I'm obsessed with show notes today. I've said it like 4 times. But once I understood why my body was reacting during a panic attack, it actually took the fear away from me. Maybe I'm lucky, but obviously in that moment, your brain thinks there's a real danger. It's part of our hardwiring of survival. You think there's going to be a bear come and attack you, and back being a caveman or something. But obviously, if you just sat around watching a movie, it doesn't really make much sense. you know, why you'd be having this panic attack, but like your heart racing, obviously that's to fight something. One of the horrible feelings I used to get with panic attacks is disassociation, where you just didn't really feel like you were there. But even that was the body's way of protecting you. If, say, your arm got severed off, it wouldn't be as painful. So literally everything that happens, as unpleasant as it is designed to actually keep you alive. And I think once I understood that, none of those sensations frightened me anymore. I was just like, oh, my body's trying to protect me. That's not scary. You know,
that's fantastic that you were able to apply that knowledge to make you feel better.
Yes. Yeah, I just kept telling myself, my body's trying to keep me alive. My body's trying to keep me alive. And then they used to just pass. And now they just don't even come in. If I feel one kind of coming up, I visualize a mouse with a gun that says bang on it. And it just goes away straight, because I realize it can't do anything.
That's amazing, actually, Ollie, that you can do that. I mean, that's really fantastic to hear.
Thank you. I appreciate I'm lucky, because that still terrorizes a lot of people. But I think that's probably a whole podcast on its own, panic
Indeed.
attacks, you know, and I definitely will cover it more. So, you know, just going back a little bit more to sort of dive into your rock bottom a little bit more. I know when we spoke off air, you used this word breakdown. To somebody that doesn't really understand sort of a mental breakdown, or sometimes it's called a nervous breakdown, what are the nuts and bolts of that?
I didn't realize what I was feeling was called depression. First of all, I thought depression, this word's tiny. This is a huge, I mean, it's a neurological illness. It's a physical illness, depression. All mental illness is physical. It was a shattering breakdown. So with this massive tsunami of panic, and then it was like, that even though it's called, it has a name. I couldn't identify the name with what I was actually feeling. It was so overwhelming. So that would be, I couldn't sleep for 3 weeks. I couldn't eat. These are symptoms of clinical depression.
Yeah.
I was in a constant state of panic. And I didn't feel suicidal at that point, because I was just overwhelmed with what was happening to me. It was like I completely lost my normal consciousness. That's what it feels like for me to be in an episode of clinical depression. This consciousness that we're talking to each other now is comfortable, and we know, there's a chair there and all this kind of thing. When I'm in the illness, it's completely different. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes absolute sense.
Yeah.
I think it's just so interesting to kind of find out what your personal sort of visceral experience of it is, just to understand it, I think, a little bit more from your point of view.
I think also, I'd like to say that, I had been using drugs that year. I couldn't smoke marijuana anymore because it gave me panic attacks. This was before the breakdown. But I remember the summer before, because it happened in November, I had taken acid a few times. And the last time I took it was mushroom tea, and it was very strong, or I don't know. And I had a bad trip. So that's the other thing I would say. It feels like a bad trip. And that's why, there's this whole kind of movement about using psychedelics for treating mental illness. And for me, that would just be like, no way. No way.
Yeah, I can't get my head around that either.
I think it provoked. I don't think it helped. I think it brought it on.
Right. And I definitely know throughout the years people that have taken psychedelics and become quite mentally unwell. But I'm also open-minded. I'm aware that some people have taken things and have reported benefits.
Oh, some people, for each their own.
Each to their own, absolutely. But I struggle to understand it. I mean, I think from what we're saying through the lens of your experience, though, if you're suffering mental ill health, to use drugs and alcohol to combat that is just a disaster, really. And I think so many people do it. And of course, people don't realize, people don't drink a beer when they feel anxious and realize that this could lead to panic disorder or more anxiety, you know, because it works initially.
And it's interesting because a lot of people smoke dope for panic and stress.
Right.
And like for me, it'd be like, no, that will bring a panic attack on. Anyway, of course, alcohol is so readily available, and it's a depressant, so it's going to make you much more vulnerable to poor mental health. If you look at what happens in the pandemic, a lot more people were drinking at home.
Absolutely.
So it's a difficult, being in a difficult situation and then putting alcohol on top makes it a lot worse. If you have a susceptibility to mental illness, whether that's through your family or what you've gone through in your life, then it's a bit of a recipe for disaster.
Absolutely. And I think that's why me and you have said this a couple of times. It isn't sort of an anti-drug and alcohol rant. You know, some people use them recreationally and it's fine. But there's just such a worry around mental health. So many people use drugs and alcohol to help them with their mental health, and it causes a tsunami of problems. And sometimes people aren't even aware of it. They're sort of in denial of around it. And I think it's sort of proven by the fact, and I see this in rehabs all the time, that the two drugs that will kill you in terms of withdrawal, and it's something you just mentioned, are benzos, things like Valium, diazepam, lorazepam, and alcohol. Other drugs, when you come off them, you might feel horrendous. And in some circumstances, I guess you could suffer a heart attack if you were very sort of physically unwell. It's possible. But they probably won't kill you. Whereas alcohol and benzos can, because you can go into a seizure because, alcohol's a depressant. It depresses the nervous system, and then you stop taking it and you get the shakes, and you can actually have a seizure, and die. And that's crazy because often people are using those things for anxiety, and then you're coming off it. You then become in a more anxious state, and doctors are turning around to people in A&E who are alcohol dependent and say, don't stop drinking, because if you stop drinking, you can have a seizure. So people are really confused. For somebody that doesn't understand alcohol withdrawal, you just talked about that. Is it bad?
It's horrendous. It's horrendous. It's because you're withdrawing the drug from the body. It's like everything goes into complete chaos, and it is exquisitely painful, and you can't function.
Right. How did you stay sober during those early days? Because I think you just said to me that you didn't have medication.
I didn't have a medical withdrawal, which is very dangerous.
It's very dangerous, yeah.
But they said to me, because I had been to A&E before and said, can I have some Valium? I need to come off. They weren't going to give me any. And they were like, no, not giving you any. And I was saying, it's dangerous. Give me more bloody Valium.
Yeah.
When you're using, you're like, oh, anyway. It was like, I had reached the end of my addiction. I couldn't bear it anymore. I just could not go through it anymore. And it was my moment of surrender. And I was absolutely terrified. I had no idea what was on the other side. And if there hadn't been that support of my family, the local alcohol services, the 12-step community, that enabled me to understand what recovery was and how to live a sober life. And the first year, I think like you said earlier, it is like that. So everything that you've been suppressing with alcohol comes up, and you start to get your feelings back, and it is incredibly frightening. And also, from when you've actually started, sorry, I'm talking about myself. From when I started self-medicating with alcohol, I went back to that age. So there's so much to relearn. There's so much to experience. without alcohol there, like just small things like maybe going to the shop or, going to work and not, knowing that you can't have that drink in the evening that's going to get you through the day, for instance.
Yeah.
Part of my recovery journey has been relapse. So I've been in recovery for 17 years, and my first relapse was about 3.5 years in, and that was when I became ill with clinical depression.
Right.
That was just for one night. And I felt at the time, I'm not saying this is a good idea, but I felt suicidal, basically.
Right.
And I picked up a drink rather than doing something that would self-harm.
Yeah.
But it stopped me. It was like, it was a break on those feelings. And then it was about 2 years later, I relapsed again. I had another episode. And that was very frightening. That relapse lasted about 2 weeks.
Right.
And I really didn't know how I'd come back from it. It was really scary. Yeah. Anyway, I think what I want to say about that is that I'm 12 years sober. So you can come back from it.
Absolutely.
Can
I just give you a clap for that? That's
Thank
amazing.
you, darling.
12 years is incredible. Well done.
You. Thank
it's
you.
amazing.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can say this, but you did say something to me off air which really demonstrates a couple of things. I just want to say before I mention that absolutely relapse can be part of people's journeys. I think sometimes there's a worry to say it's part of recovery, because I think some people read that as, oh, that means I can have a relapse then. But that isn't what you're saying. Sometimes in your journey, for most people, relapse is part of it, and you learn so much in those moments, don't you? Obviously, for some people, unfortunately, it can lead to, death, so I think that's why there's a caveat there, but it's part of so many people's journeys. And I'm so glad that you survived them and you're here. I hope you don't mind me mentioning this, but I know that there's been difficult times for you in recovery, but yet you stayed sober. Some of the things you mentioned to me off air were bereavement, breast cancer, family illness. But yet you've not relapsed, you've not picked up. That is amazing.
Yeah, when you start your recovery journey, you can't even think of doing like a week sober. It's difficult even to do a day sober, and you look ahead and you think, that you see someone who's 10 years sober and you think, oh my God, how am I going to do that? Or how am I going to cope with losing a parent? Or how am I going to cope with losing my brother? How am I going to cope with having breast cancer? And you just think, you couldn't even imagine those things happening. But I went through, I've been through a lot in recovery, and that's life on life's terms. Life doesn't change really when you're in recovery. We all still have those big events that we have to deal with, but no, it didn't make me relapse. And I would say partly that was because of the support and the fellowship that I got in my recovery groups, the support from the medical professions. And I've also had psychotherapy on and off since I was 19.
Right.
And that's been immensely helpful. I've needed to do that extra work.
Yeah.
So I think I'll also mention, like, in my family dynamic, that there is mental ill health within my family.
Sure.
And so after I was born, my mum suffered a postpartum psychosis.
Wow.
And she'd never had any mental health problems before. That's a really vulnerable stage for women, this hormonal upheaval.
Yeah.
And so she was very ill for like the first 2 years of my life. So as a baby, I was looked after by my nan and, maybe other people. So, the primary bond that we talk about, and Gabor Mate would have a lot to say about this. My favourite. dead man. Does that prime you for addiction? Does that prime you for mental ill health? And I would say definitely.
Most definitely.
Trauma. So that's also part of my story. It's very important, I think, that I say that.
Definitely. And I think it takes the stigma away, and it helps, with this idea of alcoholism being a choice, and it's just about, lack of willpower and things like that.
That makes, I've just done a film for the Addictions Providers Alliance. It's an NHS conference of all the UK addictions treatment centres, services around the UK. It's happening today, and the theme is stigma, and stigma is massive, and we need to work. We need to help people with that.
100%.
Yeah, especially young people.
Yeah. We are breaking stigma on this podcast. I love nothing more than breaking stigma. Getting on to all your amazing work with Sobriety Films UK. Obviously, creativity, it sounds like it's been a thread throughout your life, regardless of all the mental health challenges. You mentioned modelling, which I see as definitely as creative. Yeah, definitely. Where did filmmaking come in this whole journey?
Filmmaking. So my uncle is a director.
Right.
My cousin is he works in film. He's a very successful cameraman.
Right. Are either of them hiring at the moment?
Well, I'm actually going to LA in about 10 days, and I've got so much to do. I'm like,
That's great. I'm just going to give you my CV and show reel, and you can just take them. No, I'm just kidding, of course. But yeah.
And I remember going to premieres that he did when I was young, when I was under 10 or something, and I loved it. It was just like, oh my God, it's so glamorous. And then, but my initial love was actually journalism. And for me, my life's quest, or my core is looking for truth. Because I'm a documentary filmmaker, I want to find the truth about things. That was something that wasn't available in my family when I was growing up, because it was hidden about my mum's illness, because my mum then carried on being ill. Bless her. She's still alive, and she's one of the bravest people I know, and I love her so much. She's suffered so much.
There's one word you just said, and you said it very passionately, that you care about finding the truth.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, that's what I was talking about.
And it strikes me very, very clearly that without you getting sober and being in recovery, that Sobriety Films UK, well, obviously wouldn't exist, because you wouldn't be sober, but you wouldn't be able to even get to the truth, would you? Because when you're in active addiction, it's just a whole falsehood, isn't it, of reality? It's amazing, isn't it, that you kind of had to go through everything you've gone through for this amazing thing to be born. How was it born, just briefly?
Well, I did a degree in media studies. We did journalism and broadcast journalism and TV. I specialised in TV production.
Amazing.
And that was really the beginning of my love of film. And then I went to ITN.
Maddie, I just wondered if I could ask you how Sobriety Films UK came about. At what point in your journey did that happen?
It was when I'd done a year sober.
Oh, wow.
And I never thought I'd be able to get sober for a year. It just seemed impossible. And I suddenly thought, my God, I have so much gratitude. I can't believe I've achieved this. And I certainly didn't do it on my own. I want to give something back. And I wanted to do it then. And then it kind of got put on hold, although I did make some films around addiction at that time. So it took me a few years later to do it. It was October 2019. And what had happened the year before was I'd lost my dad in the March, and I'd lost my brother in July. it was kind of obviously devastating for everybody, all my family. But it gave me this kind of big kick up the arse to do something. So it really galvanized me. Yeah, it made me just think, this is what I've always wanted to do. And I think also from the pain of bereavement, there has to come something positive. And it was like, I know that my dad and my brother would have been very, I don't like the word proud, but they would have known that I was doing exactly what I wanted to do. And I thought, now's the time, I've got to do this, because it's a risk. We are a social enterprise. It's very difficult for funding and stuff like that. And I set it up on my own pretty much. So it's a big thing.
And you dedicate, almost your life to it, don't you? I know that you're always working on it and giving it absolutely everything. In a nutshell, I know this is really hard. What does Sobriety Films UK do? What's your thing? For someone that doesn't know anything about you?
Okay. Sobriety Films is a social enterprise and a non-profit. And everybody that works with us or for us is lived experience. So we all have experience of addiction, mental health, or trauma. So we champion the employees or the volunteers as well. Then we make films for, say, for instance, like an addiction agency, or like another type of film, like I'm doing a documentary next year. We run filmmaking workshops, which I really love, recovery filmmaking workshops. We did a lot of them during lockdown. So we were doing them online to like rehabs and different groups of like vulnerable people. So we basically use film. We show them how to make their own film using smartphone technology, and to have a voice to tell their own story.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah. And that's what it's all about for me, actually, because I was someone who didn't have a voice. And that's empowerment. That's the building blocks of recovery for me. Like, I was working in NHS drug treatment centre, and with a complex needs group. So these are people who are homeless, maybe, or and just working with them with film, and they've made their own films. The way it transforms their suffering, and they start to get like a bit of self-esteem, or a bit of like, oh God, I can do this. Oh my God, I made a film. And it makes them feel good. And it shows that, I think, creativity is inherent in everybody.
Absolutely.
And whether it's expressed through film, pictures, or, painting, or architecture, or whatever it is, or your garden, it's so fundamental to, your personal well-being. And so that's really the building blocks of recovery for me, using film. Sorry to interject. That's probably where that lovely quote that I read earlier on comes from, that the healing power of creativity to overcome adversity. It's such a powerful statement, and I absolutely echo that. I suppose I believe that I come from creativity. Indeed.
Do you know what I mean? And
yes.
And so therefore it's like as natural as breathing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I suppose when people say I'm not creative, I always question that. I think, really?
You're not creative?
No, I wouldn't say it, but sometimes people be like, I'm not very creative. I'm like, really? Are you sure? Because it feels something so inherent. I guess like joy is so inherent, but it's so easy to feel that you can't access it.
And the thing is, even if you are in extreme suffering, there's still that creative, the creative streak within you. And it's really important, I think, to bring that out and support and encourage. And it's breathtakingly exciting watching people who are kind of broken, where I've certainly been broken more than once, make their own film about their own story. And then so a year ago we did a suicide prevention filmmaking workshop. We screened their films at the Lyric Cinema in Hammersmith, and they're sitting there watching their film, and then they did Q&As.
Right.
I mean, it's just like, wow.
Wow.
I should mention here also the Recovery Street Film Festival. Now, so they were really important for me. I think my first film went into there in I think it was 2019 actually.
Right.
Do you know the Recovery Street Film Festival?
I've heard of it. I don't know huge amounts about it, but I'm going to go check it out for sure.
We'll put that on the links.
I will definitely put that in the links. I think it's really interesting as well, talking about creativity and how that can be such a saving grace, but yet creatives seem to be, so vulnerable to mental health. The stats back it up. I haven't mentioned it on the podcast today, but I've banged on about it before, that they're 3 times more likely to have a mental health problem, 15 times more likely to have anxiety, twice as likely, to have depression. And I think there's lots of reasons about that. I mean, there's 2 that you mentioned to me off air. One was, I think, the uncertainty that can come living the creative life. I think you felt that was something that potentially makes you more vulnerable to it.
I think for myself, it's about having a sensitivity to the world. I am extremely sensitive. I've always been to, and maybe that's part of my upbringing. I had to watch. And I had to be very aware of what was going on. And I think that creative people are very sensitive. They're either empaths or, I was going to say narcissists. I don't know if that's right, like some actors. But anyway, and directors.
No, I would agree with you completely. I would agree with that. I think there can be quite polar opposites. Within the industry.
But the creative process is absolutely terrifying. Like when I made this film for the addictions, the addictions conference that's happening today, I sat there, I did it, and I'm a terrible procrastinator as well. But I did it, and it was 8 minutes long, and I really didn't know whether it was any good. Right. And then I have like 2 people that I send it to, and can you give me some feedback about this film? I need to know that other people will get what I'm trying to say, and I don't necessarily know that I've conveyed that.
So imposter syndrome kicks in big time by the sounds of things, a bit.
It's, because creativity, it's objective and subjective, isn't it? So it's like, why do we watch why do we like certain films over others and stuff like that? So I think the creative process can be really painful.
Yes.
But very rewarding.
Yeah. Well, someone's always going to love it and someone's always going to hate it.
That's true.
And there's always going to be people in between. I mean, any movie, you use the movie as an example. You could take any movie in history and it will be someone's favourite film and someone's least favourite film.
Indeed.
For no rhyme nor reason. And it's, and like I expressed earlier, you're putting everything into it. So it's like, it just means the world, doesn't it? And you just want, I speak for myself, no matter what I do, I want it to be liked, but there's always that feeling that someone won't. And then you mix in sensitivity with that. It's like a double whammy, isn't it? And it goes round. I'm just aware of time, and I think Luke, our producer here, might kick us out any minute. Got 5 minutes. Thanks, Luke. Well, I just wanted to ask you one last thing before we run out of time. You're obviously now in recovery many years. You've got this brilliant social enterprise and all of that. I just wondered, with the kind of backdrop that you talked about with trauma and anxiety and depression, what kind of things do you have to do now to make sure that you stay on an even keel?
Well, I actually had to take time out, I think earlier in the year, because you asked me to do this podcast earlier in the year and I had to say no.
Yeah.
It's because I was taking on too much. And so one of the ways that I'm trying to balance things now is I first of all, I do cold water swimming.
Amazing.
It really helps. I mean, it really, really helps with my mental health and
gives you a massive boost of dopamine, cold water exposure, doesn't it?
Indeed.
Yeah.
I also now regularly do like hatha yoga with breathing and stuff like that. Keeping in contact with people who understand addiction and recovery is I have to do that, and I get the energy from them. And really just trying to not, if I'm not feeling great, which can happen, not to isolate, to always reach out when you're feeling like that, because so many people now have experienced mental health problems or have used substances to get through lockdown. It's incredibly common,
It really is, yeah.
And we're human beings. So it's just contact. It's contact with another person, talking to them. I'm not feeling good today. What do I do? Or,
I think it's so important to be able to say no, isn't it? I know there's a lot of performers who are sort of an inherent people pleasers, and I'm not saying that's you. I know I used to be a terrible people pleaser, and I would do things out of fear of rejection, fear of not being liked, fear of abandonment, all kinds of reasons, really. Honestly, my favorite word now is no. I love it. I just love it. And it's not because I'm being difficult. It's just because I authentically don't want to do something. Now, I'm not really applying that to work. That's kind of more I guess, in social situations. I'll just say no, thank you, and I don't even give a why. Sometimes I just go no, thank you, not on this occasion. But with work, I'm not very good at it because I feel like there's a risk of being blacklisted. But it sounds like you've dealt with that a bit better than me.
I can't say no.
Right.
I feel really guilty when I say no, especially if it's like, recovery, people are suffering.
Sure.
With my work. And that's probably why I got burnt out earlier in the year.
Yeah.
Actually I find it very difficult to say no. And it's something that I continually work on. And continually work on expressing how I feel, and being honest. And that's, I'm one of these, I am a people pleaser. I used to be a lot worse. But I have to be much more together and think of myself now.
My way through people pleasing, because I always thought it came from a place of just wanting to be a good person and sort of omnipresent with everybody. But I sort of realized, for me anyway, it was just massively unauthentic, because I was saying yes to things and agreeing to do things, but then moaning about it afterwards. And I thought, well, that's just being completely inauthentic. But me back in the day, if someone asked me to help them move house at 8:00 on a Sunday morning, I'd be like, yeah, sure, mate, I will. And then I'd do it. And then Monday night, I'd be grumbling about it,
It's a coping mechanism that we learn when we're younger.
Yeah.
To keep everybody happy so that we don't get any trouble. But you're right, it's not honest. And that was one of the things I really found in recovery, was I was not being honest about how I was feeling, about what Maddie wanted, what I want. And that's something that has completely changed.
Yeah.
But it is it's kind of day-to-day thing where I have to remind myself.
Same.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the irony, of course, is that, once you get good at saying no, it actually means ultimately you get to say yes more, because you can pour then from a fuller cup,
Yeah.
So it's really interesting, that journey with that. And so many people struggle with it, don't they? I think just when to say no, when to say yes. And,
yes.
And I'm so grateful now that seems a lot easier today. But yeah, I mean, I think with work, it's a different ball game, just because I think in acting in particular, from my point of view, jobs come around quite scarcely. So I'm always just keen to, like Pac-Man, just scoop them up and sort of change everything that I can accommodate this job. Maddie, it looks like we are out of time.
No!
Which is ridiculous. Oh. It's just flown by. Thanks so much for coming on and just spilling your guts for us and sharing everything, just to inspire everyone. Anyone with depression, anxiety, trauma, addictions, there's a way through this.
Yeah.
And look at the incredible things that you're doing. I know you're running off to multiple things today.
Yeah. The schedule is tight today. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, Ollie.
An honor.
I think it's great what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Maddie has been really generous, everyone, and she's given us tons of links for further support. I ask all guests and everyone's great, but you've literally given me a Goliath of links, which are really, really helpful. And of course, I'm going to be putting links to Sobriety Films UK and everything else connected with that, and any other socials connected to that. So please, guys, go and check out the show notes right now. YouTube is really growing, which is great because it's a new channel. So if you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe. I probably should have said that at the beginning, but there you go. I had a fear that they'd switch off if I said subscribe at the beginning. And if you are listening on YouTube, please go over to Apple or Spotify and follow us on there, and write a review as well and rate it, because apparently that really helps the algorithm. I'm obsessed with the algorithm suddenly because I want to grow this podcast even more. I'm just so delighted. The follow numbers going through Spotify and Apple at the moment, it's just remarkable. I'm so grateful. Please keep telling friends and family about this. It really does mean everything. But unfortunately, we are out of time. Maddie, thanks again.
Thank you very much.
And as always, and I always promise, and I've nearly stuck to it now, well, not quite a year, we're coming up to a year shortly. There will definitely be a new episode on a Tuesday in 2 weeks' time. Until then, look after yourself, and thank you.